Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the morning meeting. I'm Mark Halperin, along with Sean and Dan, to guide you through the day. As we always
Both
do,
go with
we've
this morning.
scrapped the entire show because the Wall Street Journal is now reporting that Secretary Kennedy wants to ban Diet Coke, Donald Trump's favorite drink. So we'll be devoting the full hour to the debate over Diet Coke. Some of us have a vested interest. You guys, I'm recused. I drink as many as President Trump. So anyway, thank you for joining. This program is based on the television network news division's morning meetings in which they discuss what's coming up that day. They kick it around.
I should
They have
check
a
your
little
mic.
twist. Paul, your mic is open. We get to ask you questions and you get to ask us questions. So if you're here in the two-way platform, you want to get involved in the conversation, please raise your electronic hand. Whether you're here or watching on X or YouTube or Snapchat or some other place where there might be bootleg copies, please keep all your comments in the chat consistent with our ethos of peace, love, and understanding, the presumption of grace to all, and a belief that while Diet Coke might be poison, it's super delicious and it allows me to wake up in time to do the program. Sean, how was your weekend?
Busy, busy. Lots of children's activities. Uh, did a little housekeeping, and then a little bit of a head cold in the last 24 hours. But I will press through, Mark, because This is the level of commitment to digesting the news and getting
Sean
ready for
Spicer.
the first joint address of this presidency.
Sean Spicer is the Willis Reed of the morning meeting, plays hurt. Dan, how was your weekend?
It's great. The oldest is home from boarding school, so we had everyone home, and nothing makes me happier than when all the kids were here. So it was great. And we kicked it off with dinner with you, Mark. Couldn't be any
Yes,
better.
we had a great dinner
Yeah,
on
yeah.
Friday.
It was funny. I saw the picture with Megan, and I literally sat up there at the post office. I was checking my email, WhatsApp, Signal, MySpace, Friendster.
If you must
Nothing.
know, the agenda of the meeting was planning a big surprise party for you. Oh, so to include you would have ruined the whole thing.
Oh, this is
Apparently, I just
okay.
did. It was in New York, Sean. Move to New York like everyone else, and you can come to all the dinners.
Mm.
Anyway, obviously, as Sean suggested, big week with Ukraine moving on all sorts of unpredictable directions. And the president's speech tomorrow night in Washington, not a State of the Union address, an address to a joint session of Congress, because that's the tradition in the president's first year. I'll be in Washington for the speech, so stay tuned for details about our live coverage. In any event, today, go ahead and put up the president's schedule, please. Let's look at the in-town pool. There's no travel today, so there's only one pool. And Sean, what catches your eye about who's in the pool today?
I'm looking. I would say that CNBC is considered new media.
Yeah.
That doesn't. But
Who's that radio pooler, Sean?
the radio is American Urban Radio.
Yeah,
So
that's an interesting choice, right?
yeah, I mean that's not exactly what you would call MAGA friendly.
Yeah. So interesting. For those who say they're just choosing MAGA friendly people, they're not. They're choosing all sorts of people. All right. But Sean, is that pool smaller than
But
usual?
by the way, that's the other point. So where it says wire at the top, you've got three main wires, right? Reuters,
Yeah.
AP, and AFP, and they are going down. The White House basically, I don't know that they've made it official yet, but they are now saying we're not going to, the idea of a pool is to have one person cover the same way
Right.
that you're seeing print. So they're like, why do the wires get an exception?
Except they're not doing that for photo, and the AP is not in the photo pool. So that's interesting
Well,
too.
I wouldn't be surprised if it makes its way to photo soon, but they
Yeah.
started with the wires.
Yeah. And you'll also notice that at least today, there does not seem to be a secondary TV crew. There's just the
Well, and the
one.
other thing is, just to be blunt, photographers don't ask questions. So having them in isn't exactly a problem. And you'll notice the NYT there. President is a huge fan of Doug Mills, who is an amazing photographer from the New York Times.
Yes.
So the Republic democracy will survive at least through Monday. That's what you're
At
saying.
least through today. At least through today. All right. At 1:30 p.m., the president's only event, which is currently press pool only, is he makes an investment announcement in the Roosevelt Room. There have been some reports about what that is. Anybody know what that is? For sure. Anybody know who it is? I think it's
Wait,
about I think it's about
1:30?
autos. I think it's about autos, right?
Well, that'd be rich with the tariff conversation.
Yeah. All right. Someone will crowdsource it. Somebody's going to tell us. Just search Twitter and see if you can find out what it is. All right. Sean Hannity at 9 o'clock has an interview with J.D. Vance I believe it's not live, and maybe there'll be clips before then. The Pentagon is making an announcement today about what it's found in its initial search for Doge spending savings. So look forward to that. On Capitol Hill, the House and Senate are both back in. The First Lady this afternoon around 2 o'clock is part of a roundtable to talk about deep fakes and revenge porn. This is her first kind of public event here in Trump 2.0. Senate Democrats are holding a press conference at 4 to say Elon Musk wants to destroy Social Security. At 4 o'clock, I'm sorry, I don't know when that is. It's this afternoon, I believe. 4 o'clock, the Rules Committee in the House side holds a hearing on using the Congressional Review Act to overturn 3 Biden-era energy provisions. And at 5:30, the Senate is expected to vote on the nomination of Linda McMahon to head the Education Department, which she's in charge of eliminating. All right.
The other thing that's not on the schedule, and it
Yeah.
obviously is usually an off-the-record thing, but generally the president meets with the network heads the day before a joint address or the morning or the day. I mean, one or the other. But
Doesn't he usually have lunch with the anchors on the day of?
yeah, but there's nothing that So
yeah, so it's actually going to be interesting. Do you know that he's doing it today? Is that your little tip to us?
No, I don't. I know that
it's usually day of, but it's interesting because in the olden days when I covered the White House in the Clinton administration, it was just the broadcast networks and CNN because nothing else existed. And then there was the expansion of it, and some years I know it's been awfully big. It's also supposed to be off the record, and back in my day, it was. You'd have the anchors kind of lean into it at 6:30 because that's the only time they had to reach the public. There was no Twitter or anything else. They would say, you can expect today, and they'd say a very senior White House official, because sometimes it was off the record and sometimes it was on what I like to call psych background, where or deep background, or even background where they could say a senior administration official, whatever the terms were. Now, what happens is, this is just so outrageous as far as I'm concerned in terms of trust. The anchors, particularly the ones who aren't super connected to the administration that's in power, they walk back to their booth of their news organization. They come down from lunch. They give a little bit of a fill to their colleagues. So a CNN anchor fills in the CNN White House correspondents, et cetera. And then those folks tell other people in the White House press corps, and then it gets reported. It's outrageous. And as I like to say, I'm very good at keeping secrets. It's my friends who aren't. Right.
Well, the other thing is in Trump world, what they have tended to do is at the end of the lunch said, Mr. President, can we use that on the record? And then we begin a series of trying to get everything on or off. Because they'll say, can we just use that? Can we use that? And he'll generally agree.
Yeah.
I also just don't think that he's in the mood to sit down with the likes of George Stephanopoulos and Lester Holt.
I know. It's going to be interesting to see who's invited. We'll stay on that because we're not invited. So I have a lunch tomorrow, but I'd be willing to cancel it, Mr. President, if you want to invite me. Again, if you're on two-way, you want to get in the conversation, please raise your hand. All right. Ukraine dominating everything. We could talk about it for the full hour. But Dan, just start us off. Where do you think this is headed? Zelensky spent the weekend in London. The president's people say nothing's happening right now. They both seem to think the ball's in the other side's court. Where do you think we head next in this process?
I think they either meet or speak on the phone pretty soon. I think both sides don't want this to completely collapse. And I think Zelensky is probably trying to figure out how to get back to the table without completely looking like he caved. I think the Europeans are going to try to help, make this happen. There's still the issue of the security guarantee that we don't seem to want to, put in writing. And Zelensky is pretty adamant that he wants, but I think they'll speak again. I think he will sign this minerals deal. And I think, it remains concerning that Russia is very happy and celebrating and putting out statements that this is great. So, but we'll see.
Sean.
I don't think that they will talk until he signs. The president doesn't want to hear any more talk. He doesn't want to hear any more complaining. He doesn't want to hear any more excuses. He wants to see action. And so if Zelensky wants to get this thing back on track, he should just say, I have signed the deal and sent it to the president. But I want to just a couple quick things.
Sean, hold on just 1 second. Let's listen to the National Security Advisor on Fox.
CBS that Zelensky got the sequence out of order, okay? Now, a lot of things happening in Europe over the weekend. Let's start with it, all right? Here's the UK Prime Minister suggests keep the aid flow into Kyiv, include Ukraine at the bargaining table. Ukraine must ensure its sovereignty and security and arm Ukraine to deter a further invasion. Now, you mentioned the French. Macron says let's go ahead and get a deal for a truce for 1 month. The head of the EU said, it's time to rearm Europe. And then the British Prime Minister chimed in with this, boots on the ground was the quote. Watch.
The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air to support peace in our continent. And to
Just see what he says about this, and then we'll come back to Sean.
Must have strong US backing. We are at a crossroads in history today. This is not a moment for more talk. It's time to act, time to step up and lead, and to unite around a new plan for a just and enduring peace.
Okay, so if all that is on the table here, and Zelensky comes back to sign this deal, and he said this over the weekend, there's not been a day when we haven't felt gratitude. It's gratitude for the preservation of independence. Our resilience in Ukraine is based on what our partners are doing for us and for their own security. If you can align all this up, Sarah, you then put the pressure on Putin to find out whether or not he is ready for peace. Does the White House believe he is at this moment?
Well, all of those things have to be tested, Bill. But what we don't have right now is President Zelensky saying, I am ready to take the steps necessary and have the conversations necessary and make the compromises necessary to end the fighting, go to a ceasefire, some permutation of there's 1 month, there's 2 weeks, there's stopping long-range strikes on both sides, on each other's energy infrastructure. All of those things are on the table, but they were on the table before last Friday as well. And what we essentially heard was he's not ready to talk about it as though grinding this war forward for the years to come is truly an option, and it's not. So we're ready to have those conversations. We had it with the Russians in Riyadh. We're ready to have it with the Ukrainians and then engage in shuttle diplomacy. But we need to hear that latter piece from Zelensky, and we need to hear it publicly.
Last question from
All right, we'll see monitoring. Sean, sorry to interrupt. Pick up on what he said and the points you wanted to make.
Yeah, real quick. I would just say, look, this thing, you can say what you will, but the media is not giving you the full picture. Zelensky was told by Kellogg's and others not to come, to sign the deal or whatever. He insisted on coming. I don't think he came in the right frame of mind. I don't think that he listened to the folks. He met with a lot of senators before who tried to set this up. I do wonder what Democratic senators told him to do in terms of posture coming in here. I do wonder what Victoria Nuland, Susan Rice, and others told him to do coming into this meeting, but it was not the right posture. You don't come into somebody's house who you're asking for more money, more support, more security, and lecture them. He needs to sign this deal if he wants to get this thing back on track. Another meeting is not a smart idea. He needs to apologize, sign the deal. The more inextricably linked that our two economies can become, meaning that we have commercial interests in Ukraine, that is basically a security guarantee. Because if Putin were to come after our commercial interests or our workers, that would be almost worse than going after military assets. So I think that there is a huge misunderstanding about what's happening here. This idea, I was at the White House yesterday or Friday, I saw the lunches and the meetings and everything, like the fake news and misinformation from some in the media and the Democrats that this was a setup is 100% ridiculously false. I think that the only chance for peace right now is that if this guy gets things back on track and makes it very clear without trying to lecture everybody as to what's going on, holding out for a smart deal is not siding with Putin. It is not Russian talking points. Making a deal that happens makes sense. And I get that he still thinks Biden's in office, but the reality is there's a new sheriff in town that's holding him accountable. And I know he's not been used to that for the last 4 years. So things need to change. He needs to get with the new game and execute.
We could talk about this for the full hour, as I said, and I'm sure folks will have questions. I'll just say two things, and then we'll move on to tariffs. I think that those who want to say with definitiveness that Zelensky did this on purpose or Trump and Vance did this on purpose are just probably wrong, but they have no evidence of it. But I think the net effect of it is it weakens Zelensky's hand.
Well, and I don't think that either one, by the way, did it on purpose, meaning I don't think Zelensky did, but I think he got bad advice as far as the posture going into that meeting.
I
didn't intend for it to blow up. I think he thought that he would show Trump that he's not anybody's puppet or something.
Yeah.
And that was not a smart move.
Well, I think
Zelensky,
it's been pretty reported that Zelensky believes he's an equal to Trump, Putin together,
Yeah.
and Trump views him as a subsidiary. Like, you're a second class, kind of country.
His problem is Trump sees him as a subsidiary, and Trump doesn't like him. And Trump's like George Bush. He believes they're good men and bad men. And he thinks he's a bad guy. And so he's just not going to give him the same level of anything. But to Sean's other point, this is more about economics than it is about military. And Putin is threatened if Ukraine is integrated into the EU, if it has strong financial ties to the United States. Zelensky needs to focus on that, because he's not going to win this militarily or diplomatically, but he can win it economically if he plays it smart.
And by the way,
you know what though, guys, but just hold on a sec. The history of Europe the last 300 years is that you need to worry about military security. I mean, we just got to be candid. I know
zero,
this is like
not
really,
zero, but of course.
But I know,
of course
but the idea
does.
that like we got some miners there, so Putin won't touch Ukraine.
He needs his
Oh,
country.
I think that Trump would go. First of all, I think if we had
First off, Sean,
there,
I don't think we're flying miners to Ukraine. There'll be Ukrainians working there. We're just going to take the receipts when they sell the minerals. Like, that's what we're going to do.
There'll be U.S. corporate interests.
There'll be Americans there.
But the other thing is, hey, as a byproduct of this, you saw the clip that just got played. You got Starmer saying, hey, we're going to put boots on the ground and play in the air. And Macron saying, hey, we should go up to 3.5 of our GDP to NATO. Win, win, win.
Totally.
All right. Quickly on this one, because again, it's unknown and we got a lot to cover. Are any tariffs going to be imposed on Mexico and Canada tomorrow, Dan? And if so, at what levels?
Yes, but I'm not sure they'll be there a week from now.
Sean?
Yes, I think the Mexico, there was a statement that Caroline put out about the cartels in Mexico, how they're being held accountable in the Mexican government. That was, to me, a tell. Meaning that they were trying to show Canada, hey, look, Mexico's stepping up to the plate. All over the weekend, I heard that the Canadians are just floundering with their proposal. They're trying, but they don't know. They don't seem to have enough to assuage Trump. And Homan was the one who met with them on Friday. So they're trying to show enough. And I think that statement was to basically say to them, look what Mexico's doing. You guys better come to the table. So to answer your question, I think yes. The key to me is to watch the energy sector and how much is carved out at that 10% level.
Oh, I'd also watch the auto sector. I think Trump's team is a little nervous.
It's an excellent answer. The correct answer is no idea, because Trump doesn't know yet. But it's trending. It's trending towards lower or no, but it's not there yet. All right.
Well, I think in light of what happened and the timing of this with the joint address, I think I would probably put more money on your bet than anything, because he doesn't want this to overshadow the joint address.
Yeah.
Well, and he wants to declare victory tomorrow night. He wants to say, I'm getting stuff.
Yes, exactly.
And only he knows what it is on his turn. He just makes it up if he wants.
We'll talk more about the speech.
It's like Kofefi.
Yeah. We'll talk more about the speech tomorrow. But Sean, what's your early kind of tip for folks about what to look for in the speech tomorrow night?
It's funny, if you had asked me this question, if we had talked about this Friday morning, I might have a different answer than I do today. Because I think that the problem is knowing the timeline that this kind of speech takes, right? You want to go into the weekend with the president rehearsing a final speech. Now the Ukraine thing, how much do you put in there? What do you say about that? Where does it go? I think he has to address Ukraine, but my guess is that he will spend the first third of the speech reciting the accomplishments of the past 30 days. How much has been accomplished? What they have done to end DEI, to stem the flow of fentanyl and illegal immigration over our southern border, address things like men and women's sports. There'll be a huge talk about Doge. And then I think you're going to get into an aspirational aspect of this. Peace on earth, going to the moon, curing cancer. You're gonna see a pivot. My guess is somewhere around the halfway mark, where it becomes much more aspirational about, here's what we can still do.
Dan.
Over under how many times we hear the phrase promise made, promise kept. Probably over 10. I agree. I think it's going to be about all the changes they've made, painting the Democrats as defenders of the status quo. What I'm really curious about, though, is all this action. There has been very little action on the economy. And does he try to use this speech to kind of, to your point, Sean, in that second half, perhaps talk about the economy and like the reconciliation bill? Because you keep seeing over and over again, voters are frustrated, the prices aren't coming down, and they don't feel like he's paying enough attention to the economy. This is his chance to kind of nip that in the bud.
Yeah, I'll say that I will bet you that Brooke Rollins, the ag secretary, gets a shout out for her work on egg prices.
I'll be curious to see how much he talks about inflation and prices. I'll be curious to see what the ratings are like. And I'm super curious to see what they do to produce content on the front end and the back end, because they're very good at putting out extra content. It's now, it's, cliched to say it's not just about who watches something, but about the coverage afterwards. But there's going to be a flood the zone in terms of coverage here that's quite interesting. And Sean, he hasn't traveled much domestically yet. Do you expect him to travel this week?
Ooh.
It's
typically after
been,
the speech, presidents do.
It always was a challenge in that. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the cabinet flood the zone, and him take one or two trips. It's not as easy as you would like. He's just not inclined to get on and do like a tour. But
right,
who knows?
Does Mar-a-Lago count? Does that no?
Yes, it used to be a battleground state, Florida. All right, again, raise your hand if you want in on the conversation here. If you're on the platform, we'll get to you soon. Dan, some Democrats have been talking for a couple of weeks now about the message of don't get baited by Doge and USAID, don't get baited by trans, don't get baited by anything. Just focus on one single issue: the economic impact Trump's policies are having on people, for healthcare, for education, for everything that's being talked about to be eliminated or cut back. Is that the right message? The impact on the real lives of real people? And if it is, can Democrats be disciplined enough to all stay on it?
Yes, I think it is a good message. It's not the end all be all. I think the challenge is, to your point, they're not disciplined. They're all over the place with like 20 different examples of how Doge is harming stuff, or he's not paying attention, the price of eggs or the price of cars. Like, I think they need to kind of pick 3 or 4 things that everybody can repeat and focus in on that. And I say it's successful because you see over and over again, Trump's not paying enough attention on the economy. People are not happy about prices. They're very nervous about these tariffs. They're very nervous about the impacts of some of the foreign events going on. So I think there is an opportunity. They just need to focus in. And I think, things like Kathy Hochul putting up a sign that says, if you've been laid off from Doge, come to New York and we'll hire you, is not the right message. It's just bigger government, I don't think, is a winner anywhere these days. And that's a very curious thing for a woman or for a governor who is seen as fairly weak and not really in control of her government in a strong way. So
just real quick, some news, and I'm not sure this is the president's announcement, but I think it might be. Honda is now going to make its next generation Civic Hybrid not in Mexico, but in Indiana to avoid the tariffs. And it's a good car, by the way, the Honda Civic. Sean, thoughts on the Democratic message?
I'm biased to the Accord, just as you know.
Yeah.
But just quickly, though, I do want to flag, because, that's great. And if U.S. jobs are, if that happens, it's terrific. But we do have to kind of call out that a lot of these promises that were made in Trump's first term never really materialized. Correct. And so it's like the guy from Japan promises $100 billion, and Apple was already planning to do what they were going to do. They just kind of put some lipstick on it and put it out.
At the DNC, they call it promises made, promises made.
There you go. But I just want to flag the history of these things going through. But hopefully that does, and the people of Indiana benefit.
Sean, thoughts on that Democratic message and on Honda?
Well, on Honda, it's great news, right? And I think that's what's going to buttress the president's point on tariffs, is that these are the kind of policies that will encourage U.S. investment and job creation when businesses move back. The problem is, with respect to some of the stuff, Canada in particular, is that there are certain things that just can't move for a lot of reasons, which we don't have time to get into because of things that literally, physically, geographically only exist in certain places around the world.
You can't move Chelsea Football Club to Brooklyn.
Correct. Yeah. I think that the Dem response, I think Alyssa Slockett has an opportunity tomorrow. I've never been a fan, I think I said it before, of responses. I don't think a ton of people are looking And again, they're contrived because you don't actually hear the speech. You're not actually responding. So, does she talk about the price of eggs and the impact on families of inflation? The problem that they have, and they've got to be careful on this one too, is that for 4 years they said that inflation was transitory, that it wasn't a big deal. And now suddenly 1 month into Trump, they care about inflation. So there is a bit of a issue there with credibility when it comes to economic issues. How she handles that in particular tomorrow, and it's not just her. Part of the bigger issue the Democrats have right now is that they're not singing on the same sheet, right? Each person has their own stuff. There was a huddle, a meeting over the weekend, I guess, where they were all throwing out ideas. And the problem is, it's like any food fight of a party out of power, that the base thinks that we need to double down on the base stuff, and the more moderate folks think that we need to do less of the base stuff. And until somebody rises up, everybody still thinks that they're they're right. So what happens tomorrow night isn't just about the message, it's about the coordination. Do they actually get people to sing off the same song sheet or not?
Well, they're trying to by having Democrats members bring as guests people who have been or will be adversely affected. We'll see. All right,
But I mean,
last thing
Mark,
before...
even that's going to be curious, because if all it is just people who were laid off, the secretary and so, that's sad. But like, if it's a veteran who, suddenly was answering phones and now the phones aren't being answered, like, that is a good example. Yeah. But if people just bring anybody, it almost seems like we're defending every single job cut. And that would not be the place I'd want to be.
Yep. All right. Again, raise your hands. One more topic, and then we'll go to you all. So until Vice President Harris makes a decision about whether she's going to run for governor of California, president, or nothing, Democrats are a little bit frozen. But nonetheless, you're starting to hear a little bit more speculation about which governors or others might run for the nomination in 2028 and be leading surrogates in 2026. So David Rednick of The New Yorker, with a unique eye for spotting talent, produced this. Please put up that. There you go. So he did an interview with Governor Walz of Minnesota, who I believe has run for national office before. He was on the ticket in 2028. Sean, or 2024. Sean, start with you. Does the prospect of a Walz presidential candidate strike fear in your heart and in your mucus-addled head?
Just tell me where to send the check.
Yeah.
I'm on Team Walz.
Yeah. Dan, are you super psyched about a Walz presidential campaign?
No, and I will say by New Yorker standards, that story is almost like a tweet in its length. It's not a particularly long and in-depth story. No, look, I think just my own opinion, he'd be terrible. I mean, what he showed on the campaign trail was that he was kind of weak. He is very liberal, and he's going to have to defend the Biden-Harris ticket that he served on. I mean, Sean said earlier, Democrats didn't talk about inflation. Democrats did. The Biden administration did not. There were a lot of senators and governors that were out there screaming like, this is a problem and you got to say something. So I just think there's nothing that I have seen from him or that I saw from him that would augment that you would be a strong national candidate. And I think the challenge for Walz is the challenge for every Democrat, which is right now we look like we're defending the status quo when change is popular. And a lot of what Trump is doing, we always talk about this, polls 80-20, so to speak. Immigration, kind of the idea of cost cutting in government. There's challenges. When Democrats say, like, well, of course change is good, we never want to fill it in. And Walz doesn't strike me as a guy who's going to lead that, blaze that trail to defining real change. He just doesn't seem to be a strong suit. And his governing record in Minnesota is not something I could see the party rallying around.
The fundamental problem is that there are consultants around every politician who make a ton of money when they decide to run. And they all encourage you and tell you, boss, you're amazing. You'd be awesome. We could do this. And here's the path. And I think Walz has probably got a team around him that suggests that he could raise the money and be that Minnesota, nice kind of guy.
I also think when you get in the bubble and you get all that attention, it's pretty addictive.
Yeah. I saw in the chat, somebody said, Mark can be funny sometimes. I have no comment on that. All right. Trish, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are, what's after you unmute, and what's on your mind, and thank you for joining.
I am here in Central Virginia, and since Reagan, been a GOP supporter, pro-life mainly. But one of the main issues that I want to talk about is all these cuts and firings with the Doge. I am a former Air Force veteran, and I am very concerned about what's happening in DOD. But even more personally, I have a daughter who's a probationary employee with DOD in Central Virginia here, and my ex-husband as well, who's also an Air Force veteran who works in the same facility. And there is great concerns about what is going to happen to them. And although I generally have supported a lot of Trump's policies, some not, just like with anybody in any campaign. First, in going back, I want to say I support two-way platform tremendously. I've been with you guys since, like the beginning of the campaign, because being pro-life to me means treating people with dignity and respect, including people who have different views. And I think there needs to be more civil dialogue for us to move forward on anything.
Thank you for that.
So in going back with this issue personally, I think implementation of these policies, quite frankly, have been inhumane and reckless. There are many concerns, but first I'll start with the personal. And my daughter's an IT specialist, probationary employee, who has done, from everybody that I've talked to in the facility, has done amazing work. And she can ascribe to me all kinds of things. She has a higher security clearance than I ever did, even as a JAG. And yet she is fearful of what's about to happen, and to have to go through this when this past week, we buried my 22-year-old son. So in the midst of this, she is having to suffer a possible job loss with her own health issues. And then her dad also, who has been for decades with DOD after being in the Air Force, had to answer a 5-question questionnaire about where he was last week and what he was doing. Putting aside the security issues of having to answer those questions because of the area they are in and what they are doing, is have to answer that is, he's on bereavement leave, it's had to work remotely. And so I just find the dialogue out there about federal workers or any workers. I've had to work remotely for several years because of my son's cancer. And his dad also has had to work a lot remotely when he could. So it's not about, treating federal employees all alike. Yes, there needs to be downsizing. DOD's audits have been terrible. And people who are not performing well should be able to be fired more easily, but it's just been cruel the way this has happened. And they haven't, I feel, in many respects, followed proper RIF procedures in a lot of the things that they have done. There's AI risks that have been raised to me. I was watching Vivek talking about the change in Doge from the legislative, constitutional, legal approach to downsizing and dealing with their policies going to AI. I at one time was worked in legislative advocacy for Military Officers Association here locally. And we used to talk about voting overseas for military, a lot of things I would, try to advocate for in the military. And I'd actually have Republicans who would tell me about the concerns about foreign interference in the voting process. But where is the concerns about the AI risks in answering these questions and building this database of responses from people? It's my understanding this is going to be used to determine whether your job is viable or not.
Trish, our heart breaks for you and your family, and I'm sorry, not the only one, incredibly impressed with your strength and your clarity under these circumstances. So thank you for joining and for sharing all that. And so sorry for your family. A heartbreaking series of events. I'm going to ask you one question and then turn to Dan and Sean. How have the local commanders handled the uncertainty and the concern and the style that's coming from Washington and from Doge? Are they being reassuring? Are they knowledgeable about what's going to happen? Or are they feeling the same way?
They are very supportive of their local unit and the people. It's like my daughter has gotten, supervisors and so forth that have written up and say, you can't do this, these employees. The security risks involved to our troops, it's Army unit. If there's any, they can't report some things because the people who are getting that information don't have the security clearances, about what they're doing. They're concerned about the foreign influence. So they have been supportive, but they are concerned that things will happen on top of them and force their hands. And that's what I'm being told is their hands are tied, are going to be tied.
Okay, let's bring Sean in. Sean.
Yeah, I want to express my condolences for what your family's going through. I
Thank you.
think it's extremely brave that you're able to address this personal issue during such a time. So thanks for being with us and for what you're going through on several levels, what you're dealing with your son, and then obviously with your family as well. I noted this last week. I think job losses are difficult for anybody, whether it's a private sector job or a personal sector job. And I know that a lot of people go through these issues and feel sorry for them. I don't want anybody to suffer or to have to deal with the challenges that come with making payments, et cetera. And obviously this is a very personal issue for you. I get it for a variety of reasons. Secretary Hegseth made some comments on a video last night that I would call your attention to. I don't know if you've seen the video, but one thing is he made it very clear that this was a civilian issue alone, not on the military side, that all of this was being done with full OPSEC to make sure that it was just, and to answer the questions, I talked to actually some DoD civilians over the weekend and asked them what the status was with the meeting. And, it was literally just here's what I did. It's not, there was no need to get into operational security or classification. But if I read and drafted a report on this subject, that doesn't violate anything. But not being able to do at some point, as Elon said the other day, a pulse check, especially in the area of DoD. And I assume based on your service and your family service that you're well aware. I mean, the idea you noted that they can't pass an audit and the rampant waste and inefficiencies and duplicity in DoD in particular is epic. And I think that we have seen over decades a lot of lip service about addressing it. And so this may not be the way that some people like or want to, but at some point you can't say we need more money, we need more money, we need more weapon systems and do nothing about it. And so this is the first step. And my guess is that it's a first step in getting a handle on how much money is being spent, where is it being spent, and having some level of accountability. And while there may be some pain in that, at the end of the day, our number one focus should be the defense of the nation, not figuring out, and we don't have the money anymore. We face additional challenges with respect to China and other places. And we have our priorities wrong in a lot of circumstances. So I get it. It may not be the prettiest way, but we can't keep going the way we have been going. It is unsustainable.
Dan, or I'm sorry. First, do you want to respond to that?
No,
Trish?
I mean, I agree generally with the idea we need to take steps. I just have really deep concerns of the AI influence in the process. When you detach from the human factor, human decision, part of it, and people hopefully will have, in addition to, I mean, I'm not against AI overall, but I think we have to be very cautious and make sure there's a human element and people in the process, commanders or whatever, professionals. I mean, both my ex-husband and my daughter are civilian employees, but they still play a critical role. But it's hard for an AI to judge that in a snapshot in 1 week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dan.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, one, no private the way that Musk and Doge have treated federal employees is disgraceful. I've said this before. No private company would tolerate a chief executive and his, lieutenants publicly trashing people. They're not all corrupt. They're not all fraudulent. Like, it's good politics to label people that way. And I know most people just look at the bureaucracy as a whipping pole, but it's disgraceful. It needs to be called out and needs to be said over and over again, because Republicans love to talk about the private sector. A CEO would be fired for behaving this way repeatedly. The second thing is no private company would operate where like the CEO of GE would say, give me the 5 things you did this week. He would go to the team leaders and say, you need to talk to your people and find out what the 5 things, that they did. And he or she would say to the team leaders, let's say, I need 5%, either in budget or personnel or both. You know your department's best. You know who's performing and who isn't. And you would go down. So, I mean, the idea that, like, to your point, an algorithm is doing this, you can use an algorithm, but you would layer on your leaders. Otherwise, why do you have leaders? So, I mean, the answer is they don't care what they think. It's an ideological drive to get 5%. And Elon Musk and a bunch of 19-year-old engineers are just spitting it out. Now, to your point, Sean, DOD seems the one place that they did kind of say, you kind of go get us 5%, but there's kind of an outstanding question to what extent they're really going to give them rope. But the way they're going about this, and I know people don't care, no private sector company would ever operate this way.
Well, no private sector company would have ever gotten themselves into this situation. I mean, it's unsustainable. No private company could have gone 8 years without passing an audit. So again, I think private sector for a variety of reasons, because if you can't afford, I mean, at some point you're going into the red, you start to realize, hey, I've got to make cuts, and you start actually acting. We keep passing the buck year after year after year after year, and in fact do the opposite. We add spending, we add duplicity, we add waste. We literally just added DEI programs and training and contracts to the millions of dollars while we were literally facing additional challenges from abroad.
But your number one asset is your people.
I get it.
I mean, that's the thing. So there's nothing wrong with the cuts. It's just how they're going about this is somewhat idiotic. It just is.
Trish.
Well, but also keep in mind, Dan, that there are certain constraints, meaning part of
unions.
They have to do is that if they go in and target, right, then that opens up a whole nother can of worms. By doing it writ large, because of certain protections that exist in the federal government, they can't look like they're targeting. They've got to actually do things in a non-private sector way because of the actual construct that exists, which makes it more challenging.
Trish, what would you say to very MAGA people who are enthusiastically cheerleading for this process the way it's going so far?
I would say they just don't understand the impact of what they're doing. And it's okay to have certain policies, but you got to think long term and not such short term catastrophic things. Like just having engineers we're losing that support our software, our government programs, social securities, taxes. They're being fired. They're gone. Ultimately the software and everything. This is like what I'm hearing is that, you're going to have systems collapse with such rapid,
well, let's back up a second. Nothing's happened so far. They were asked to provide 5 things that they've done, right?
Well, it's not just that though.
Well,
Sean.
it's not just that. Yeah, to her point.
I get it. But today DOJ is going to start talking about the recommendations at DOD. Let's see where this goes. But at the end of the day, Trish, and I feel for you on a personal level, whether your kid worked as a barista or a DOD IT official, I don't want someone to lose their job. Like I want them to be successful and have challenges. So, but when you talk about long-term, I also look long-term and go, okay, what are we doing to deter the threat that China faces? What are we doing to make sure that the debt that's piling up that $100,000 per person owns right now is somehow mitigated in the future? We aren't thinking long-term. National debt is a national security issue.
Sorry.
Well, and I think I will say my old boss, Jared Polis, I think said this best. The one challenge with DOJ, because I think most people agree with just kind of philosophically the cuts is there is no vision about what this new government looks like. That is where Trump and Musk, because let's be candid, this was not Trump's focus until kind of September when Elon got on board. And even then, it wasn't until after the election, they kind of figured out how are we going to do this? There is no vision or explanation to the public, which the public deserves, of what is the new government. There is
Trish, if Elon Musk said, "Let me come spend a day with you on the facility," who would you introduce him to? Who would you want him to talk to?
Well, I don't work at the facility. I actually work in a private law firm. But I would think the commander first. You'd have to go to the commander first.
Yeah.
And go around to the facility. But I really want to add too. I mean, I've been interested in doing things in the political realm as well. It's not just personal. I have a lot of interest in these national and international issues, especially as an advocate I was in the Military Officers Association. So I when I say long term, I mean saying when you have mass firings of people and you have them, let out to the workforce. I have another daughter who's had trouble getting work, just as young adults have really suffered in the workforce since COVID, and everybody coming back to work, at the same time. And she had to try to work remotely so she could help me at home. But the thing is, it wasn't just her personally. I could see the impact. Like I'm thinking about the impact on the Virginia's governor's race.
Yeah.
Spanberger's ratings seem to be going up, and it's, very evident. Obviously, you have a lot of federal workers in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. And I have deep concerns about I used to be in the 7th district. I have deep concerns about Spanberger being governor. But so I see some other impacts, politically and nationally, in various areas that we don't have time to talk about. Yep. In this rapid mass firings and and just not getting their message out of what is their plans for the future, like Dan was saying.
80% of federal employees are outside of Washington, D.C.
Yep. Trish, thank you for coming in. We wish you and your family the very best under tough conditions, and please come back and update us whenever you would like. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Sean Duffy, Secretary of Transportation, joins us now. A different Sean Duffy. Sean Duffy, welcome in. Unmute. Tell folks who don't know where you are.
Hello, everybody. I'm
What's
actually from the South Dayton area, and this is awesome, Dan. I gotta say, I'm not a Democrat, but your smile is great. Sean Spicer, nice to talk to you. And Mark, I gotta say, I watched Morning Joe like 10 years ago in 2015, 2016. I would watch that, and I can't believe the straight face you would have in some of those conversations. You did a great job there. But
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. And then real quick, I'm a Catholic. I try to pray a rosary every day. And Trish, your decade will go to your son tonight. So thank you for that. And I just wanted to ask, well, there's so many things I want to say, but real quick, I went to Sam's Club this weekend. If you want to talk about prices, and I see beef prices went up a little bit from a couple days ago. I think 84% of all cattle is owned by 4 companies. So Sean, is there any chance that we could break that up and try to maybe make it more competitive? Is that something that Trump would be willing to do? Because if you look at if you're going to try to do, I'm also kind of a analysis guy for my job. If you look at heads of cattle count, we've had the lowest heads of cattle count since 1970s. And I think it's almost half of what we've had from back then. And, now we probably have 120 million more people. So we got to bring up supply of stuff and try to bring some incentive to bring up the supply of that. The eggs thing, that's a whole different issue. But that's just one thought there for our ag secretary.
Okay, let's answer that one. Sean, do we need to break up big beef?
You know what? It's a really interesting question, and I'll tell you it from a different perspective. I used to go out to the Delaware shore once in a while to relax on the weekend. And as you drive through the Delaware area, it was funny. I started doing this back in the 90s, and slowly but surely, these chicken farms along the way, over and over, you'd see signs out front. It would be Smith's Farm, Jones's Farm, whatever. And over the last couple of decades, it would say, have a big Purdue sign out front. And you'd talk to some folks here and there, and they were just getting bought up. And I don't know this for certain. Obviously, I can't say that I'm an expert on ag or beef, although I have a speech next week to the pork producers, so I can ask them.
Ooh.
But, so I will say that it's an interesting question, because I think part of it is that there's a buy-up of a lot of these farms. Okay, that's number one. I talked to a rancher down in Texas at a dinner probably 2 months ago, And we were talking about the fact he's got several daughters. And he said, it's a shame. I got to figure out if one of them is going to take over because I'm getting offers all the time to sell the farm. And I'd love to keep it in the family. But at some point, you just, reality sets in. On a personal level, I will tell you that as somebody who likes a good steak, I have found several, even here in Virginia, several places that have organic beef, that develop them, that are more, focused on that kind of stuff. That where you don't have non-GMOs, no preservatives, additives, things like that. So I think there is a market for it that's growing. And you can see a lot of that in how it's being shipped now, where people can buy meat that is not that comes with without a lot of the stuff that they're dealing with beef. So the problem is as they get bigger, there's an incentive for a lot of the bigger farms to go in and buy them. I just don't know that you can force that to happen.
Okay. Real quick, and then I want to switch over real quick to Russia since I got you guys. So being a Catholic, we have, I think, at least one day a year where we devote a mass to Our Lady of Fatima. Does Trump know anything about Our Lady of Fatima in the Three Secrets? And I'm not sure if Mark's a Catholic or not, but I know there's some things in there about Russia that maybe would be interesting to the administration. I'm not sure if there's anything that you can say about that, Sean, or not. But yeah, I'll hand it back to you. I don't want to get too in the details of that.
I don't know what he knows about Fatima or not. I just don't know how much of that's come up. I think for a lot of Catholics, they probably don't know a lot about Fatima. So I don't know the answer to that.
Sean, we'll get back to you. Sean, very grateful to you for coming on. We know you had more topics you wanted to discuss, so come back soon, and thank you for being part of Two Way.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. All right. Tony lives on a boat, so
Sean Spicer, I'm impressed you knew that much about beef. I'm very impressed.
Oh, listen, I do like a good steak. I maybe we'll see if we can make.
Oh, I love it. Yeah,
Tony.
We got
Tony,
the farm. Maybe I'm gonna get the farm to sponsor the show because it's good stuff.
Tony, what body of water is your boat on?
On the York River, right at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay.
It's gotta be cold.
It is chilly out there today. It's about 40 degrees out today.
Yes, sir. How long have you lived on? How long you lived on the boat, sir?
About a year and a half now.
How's it going?
It's coming along. I mean, it is what it is. it's as a senior, I'm retired now. It's the most economical way for me to live.
Yeah. Where do you take the boat?
Well, just out on the Chesapeake for now. I'm in the middle of a refit to be able to take it down to the Caribbean and wherever else I end up going.
Do you have your captain's license?
You don't need a captain's license if you have lessons.
No, I know that. I'm just asking if you do. I didn't.
It's not worth going and getting one. If you're just a pleasure craft, it's not worth getting a captain's license.
The only reason going is then your friends have to call you captain.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is good.
You get the hat too.
Yeah.
You get the hat.
Most of them just call me a rat bastard, but that is.
What's on your mind, sir? Thank you for joining.
The one thing about the downsizing, during COVID, I ran a big consulting firm for an importer of flooring, and I got the call just one day in the middle of COVID. It was actually on Memorial Day. The company that I ran the consulting for, which we handled all the customer service nationwide and all the technical service nationwide, they called me up and said, "Thank you, but we're going in a different direction. You're fired." So I have a whole lot of empathy for, that's just the way business is.
Yep.
So that's just the way, I had 10 employees that I had to struggle for a year trying to stay employed after we lost. That was my biggest contract, almost $1 million a year. And for a small company, that was, 70% of our income that went down.
Yes, sir.
So as I don't have a whole lot of, you got to downsize the government. And Dan talked about not having the government not having the vision. The government doesn't have a vision now, in my opinion. So, you've got to cut costs. The government has to be downsized. It has to be smaller. And if you go in there with a cleaver and do it, and then you worry about, things that may go under that may slip through and fix those as you go. That's the way every company does that when you're living in the business world. And I can just say, as somebody who, most Americans, or as Mark likes to say, tens of millions of Americans, have no empathy for these federal workers that have been collecting paychecks for years and years and years, and have no repercussions if they don't produce. So that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to talk about was Ukraine. Most Americans, or tens of millions of Americans, are tired of Ukraine. We're tired of spending money over there when money could be spent here. So those are the type things.
Tony, you're absolutely right about those. And the tens of millions applies to both those points of view. Let Dan comment, and then Sean, just because we're headed towards the end here. Dan.
Yeah, Sean, I'll be quick. One, I agree with you about cuts. Like, it happens. And to your point, there isn't a lot of sympathy. And Sean's made the same point, because this happens in the business world. I think the one difference is, in the business world, when you make cuts and you have to shrink, small things can fall through the cracks, as long as, like, your biggest customers, you kind of keep on board to keep paying you to then ramp back up. Government doesn't work that way. You basically serve almost the lowest common denominator, and you have to serve everybody all at once. So again, this is about kind of how you go about it. And I agree with you, and I think this is Democrats' problems. They're focused. They don't want to talk about how they would do this to ultimately shrink the government. And I think on Ukraine, you're right. A lot of people, and this is true even in the Democratic Party, a lot of the Democratic base would rather this money be spent at home than abroad. And again, one of the things I think Democrats have to think about is, in 2028, we can't just say we're going to go back to the way it was with NATO, with everybody. We've got to come up with what is a new construct for the future. We can't just say his stinks. And that's going to be a challenge.
Sean.
Tony, I'm glad you brought up COVID, because I agree with you. There's empathy for anybody that's lost their job, but for thousands, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people lost their jobs during COVID. And those were government decisions as well. And I don't know how many times we've had to go back now and relitigate that, but thousands of people lost their jobs. Thousands of kids were deprived of an education in critical years because of key government decisions. So, it's interesting to me how we care about people and who we care about. And we should, like I said, it's a great point that you're making about the destruction that occurred during COVID and the lack of accountability that still exists. On Ukraine, look, the thing that I found fascinating this weekend is I think Putin's a horrible guy, Russia's the aggressor, and we need to stop them, right? 100%. But two things can be true at the same time. Ukraine is an inherently corrupt country. The Biden State Department put out a report about it. Zelensky said a couple of weeks ago he didn't know where half the money was. And you can actually, and that's what's driving a lot of this, is that for years, we've basically been saying, we'll just keep throwing good money after bad. Well, there are things in the United States that aren't getting done, money that we don't have. And I think that the lack of accountability and what we're seeing now, where everyone says, if you have any criticism of Ukraine, you're spewing Russian talking points, is ridiculous. I don't want Russia to advance. I want them to stop. I want the killing to stop. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that you give a blank check to Ukraine.
Yeah, Sean, but I want to be clear. We weren't throwing good money after bad. We were arming somebody to stop someone who had invaded them.
Okay. And throwing good money after bad, both.
Yeah.
Tony, one quick point, Tony.
Yeah, inflation. I don't know how you guys expect, or how the Democrats expect inflation to come down in 6 weeks. That's not how it works. And I think most Americans understand you're not going to get a drop in prices in 6 weeks of an administration. That's not how inflation works. That's not how production works. That's not how the supply chain works. So I think most Americans understand that's going to take time for prices to come down.
Well, look, I think two things. The prices coming down would be deflation, because what you're talking about is slowing the rate of growth of inflation. Look, I agree with you, except Trump always bragged like he could do it in a day. And secondly, tariffs and other things do not help with that. That's just a fact. So, I mean, that's where I think Democrats feel like you ran your mouth about how easy this was and how you could solve this, but you're talking about DEI and everything else. Optics matter. And he doesn't talk about this.
I will tell you something about tariffs. As a company that that worked with the company that brought
Tony,
product out of China.
be quick, Tony, please.
As soon as the tariffs were put on plywood products, every company in China moved their stuff to Vietnam where it was tariff free.
Yeah.
Everything like that happens, that's exactly what happens. They avoid.
We'll see. We'll see if it does. Tony, thank you. Thanks for coming in. Please come back. Enjoyed having you on. All right. Thanks to everybody. Great questions today and really interesting. Let me just tell you what's coming up on two-way. Tonight at 5 Eastern time, Megan McCain's Happy Hour is back. Two great guests, Rachel Bade, who's the Politico Capitol Bureau Chief, and Raman Satuda of Variety. They're going to talk about Donald Trump and about Ukraine and about all the activities that have gone around. Then Raman is an expert on Donald Trump. He's written quite a bit about him from his apprentice days. And then they're going to do a little bit on the Oscars as well. So that's Megan at 5 tonight, Eastern. Then at 6 Eastern, two-way tonight is on. Matt Gorman, who's a great guest, will join us. Some other folks we're still talking to. Special tonight, first episode we've had that's been sponsored by the Bonson Group. And we'll learn about the Bonson Group tonight if you join us. Making the point, if you'd like to sponsor this program, if you'd like to be the first sponsor of the morning meeting, you have that opportunity. So contact us if you'd like to join in.
Especially if you're steaks, if you're beef company,
beef company would get a 20% discount on the sponsorship. But if you'd like to sponsor the morning meeting, please reach out to us. We'd love to have you as we start to have our program sponsored. And then, as I said, we'll be back tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern time. Tomorrow night, I'll be back with two-way tonight. And then tomorrow night, special, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, 30 minutes before the president's slated to give his address. I'll be on with a full special two-way style from 8:30 till after the speech. We'll talk about the speech. We'll have some guests. We'll watch the speech together. And then afterwards, we'll talk about what people thought about the speech. Different way to experience it. You can watch on your second screen or make us your first screen. We'd love to have you as we go through two-way style with participation and the presumption of grace to all the president's address to a joint session of Congress. Grateful to you all for making time. Appreciate, as always, Dan and Sean's attitude towards beef and everything else. Gentlemen, see you in 23 hours. Thank you for joining.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day, everybody. Oh, I forgot. Sean, what's on your show tonight?
Doug Collins tonight, Lindy Lee tomorrow.
Oh, the Lindy Lee show is going to be excellent. Not to minimize
and by the way,
Secretary
and Dan.
Collins,
it's Lindy Lee and Dan.
Lindy Lee and Dan. All right, that's going to be a Buffalo program. Lindy Lee is very excited about being on your show. I can tell you from a source familiar with Lindy Lee's thinking.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. Again, thanks for participating in two-way. We'll see you in a little bit.